came about. However, with recent radiocarbon dating, is put the date of that maybe even earlier. So there's a lot of debate on the dating of the art, but what's so amazing about it is that it is continued right up until the present day, and is the oldest form of artistic expression, which should be noted, because although we probably wouldn't understand it as well as an Aboriginal, we can definitely have an insight on it and appreciate their art. Sorry, my slides are being a bit slow. Oh, there you go. So this is one of the cave paintings in discussion. So as you can see here, there's all different layers as well of the art, showing that is added on over time, and it's a continuous piece of art, and that brings some controversies with it as well. But they used soil, rock, and other materials around them to be able to produce these carvings or paintings on the wall. And they're able to do it in a way that's very unique. And reason why is different and unique to ours, and why is so significant to today, is that it's almost like it's documenting their history through their own perspective, and it's something that is continuously added to for the period. So as you can see here is almost someone said earlier, like a fish, and it has spirals at the bottom, and they all have different, you know, some of them are very dark and some of them are very light, and the light ones are the earlier paintings. But to understand Aboriginal art, you do need to understand the symbolism to it, and what is known about this art is almost like an X-ray art. So instead of just putting an animal on the art, it shows their skeletal outline, their muscles, their skin, so it's almost every layer of an animal is represented in this painting, and each painting has their own meaning, in which that different Aboriginal tribes will have different meanings for different things. So different animals will have different meanings to them, and different colours have different meanings. But although it has still got multiple meanings, the principle of it is still the same. Is a way of documenting what they've had connections with around them, and what they've experienced in their lives. And to have an Aboriginal painting today, you have to be Aboriginal to paint them. You couldn't just be anyone that was making Aboriginal paintings and passing it off on that, because you don't understand the meanings behind it. Is a completely different concept of what we know, and each tribe has their own different meanings. So if you were to just jump into it, you wouldn't, without any knowledge and without being Aboriginal, there wouldn't be any understanding to any of it, and it would have no relevance. So it's almost like if you make Welsh cakes out of Wales, it's almost like they're not Welsh cakes anymore, because they're not made in Wales, and that's what makes them Welsh, is because they're from Wales. And you know, someone questioned why focus on Australia rather than North America. Well, you know, it has even less population, but it has a lot of evidence, and all this evidence that has been collected is been respected and still added to by Aboriginals today, which has brought controversy, because you have this, that some people feel like they shouldn't be added to the present day, but that's what this art is. It's a continuous piece of work. It's something that has been practiced for all these years, and you can't put an end to it just because people, you know, feel like it needs to be protected in a way that it has to always be viewed like a permanent piece of work. When you have Western cultures, the work is always permanent, is always there to go back to, whereas this one, Karl compared it to the social media platform Snapchat, where it is not always there, but the message is sent, and that's not what I'm saying that is, but it's good comparison to sort of get an understanding for it, that it's not always meant to be like that. It's meant to be added to, and each one can mean something of the family, the tribe, and that is what is important to know to this. So it brings that whole idea that non-Indigenous people should not paint this, and it seems very obvious, but it's become very controversial today, and non-Indigenous Australians, they don't have the authority to start making an Aboriginal piece of artwork. So it's all about keeping it to the Aboriginals and respecting their culture and their meanings. Karl explained how this can be different ways of history, and that's definitely evident in this. So if, for example, it's oral history, and it has 500 different groupings and different tribes and different art meanings. So that means we cannot understand their mind, their expression of art, because the way we think of it is different to how they think of it. And we need to sort of understand that to be able to have an insight of this. And one way of looking at this is not interpreting art itself, because I don't feel like I have the authority to sit down and talk about the symbols and the colours and the animals, when I don't know anything about each individual tribe and what that means to them. But they're almost like empirical observations around them, what they've had connections with. That is what they like to paint and do carvings with in rock. And it's almost like dreams as well that come through. So Karl explained that if you have a dream, you don't tell that other person, other people your dream, because that can influence their dreams, and your dreams have their own symbols and meanings. And if you tell that person your dream, they might subconsciously take that in and dream about it themselves, and it has nothing to do with them. It's just symbols that they cannot understand and interpret, but something that you maybe can, and it's all personal to you. So it shows that a metaphor really, how it's almost like dreams. They're personal to each tribe, and anyone else outside of that tribe wouldn't understand the relevance. But this is very relevant to them, and this is a way of documenting history. And I think that's something that's always been about in humankind for years, is a continuous thing to always document history, whether there's always been different forms. And in Britain we have lots of different manuscripts, and the same with a lot of other Western cultures, whereas this culture, they take this in a very artistic way, and I think they're very beautiful expressions of art. The swirls and this X-ray sort of vision of animals. But what had happened once Western cultures had come to Australia, that is when the cave paintings sort of a change in themselves, where it was dot painting started to happen. So they would have a painting like this, and then they would add different dots. So they might add a first phase of dots and then add another phase of dots to hide the meaning behind the image. So from a glance, it just looks like a very beautifully decorated picture, but when you look very closely, there's more detail to it. And this was almost like a way of the tribe hiding maybe their spiritual or ritual beliefs, or their connections with animals and other peoples, or their tribe's journeys, all those things so personal to them that they felt like it was relevant to their tribe's history. They covered that up, and this blocked non-Indigenous people in white settlements from understanding this. And this would then build to appeal to different audiences, from children to adults. And this is how this one painting is not as clear cut as what we would think it is. They have a lot of meaning to it, and it speaks to different people at different stages of their life, or different genders, or it's all about identity, I think, when you get from this. And almost with the lighter colours, and then you have the darker colours, it's almost like it's almost like a form of paleography, but in art, where you're looking at different scribes' handwriting and seeing, you know, that this handwriting's older than that one, and you can find out how it has a relevance throughout time, but how it's still being added to. And I think that's what's interesting to note. And there was a lot of comparisons that were brought up to this. You know, this is a art that always changes, and is always engaging with different Aboriginal groups. So when it comes to non-natives or tourists, it just looks like dots or lines or swirls, but only certain tribes had taken on this dot. And so the dot in paintings, the dot paintings, it's only for a certain tribe, and that's how you realize that some people wouldn't have the authority to do that dot painting, because they're not from that tribe, and it's about respecting that tribe and their belief in their culture, and their identity, really. And all these artworks just tell a story, and most of it is based on the artist's individual journey in life, which may be about their parents or warriors, or even mundane life, daily life, such as fishing. But you know, this can also be reflective of their tribe, or captures of stolen generation, captures the heartache of the stolen generation. And the stolen generation was for about 100-200 years, about till the 1970s. That was when Aboriginals were taken into slavery, and this art even then was still important to them, and it was still held, but it had changed because of this, because of the West. And you can still, you know, is still telling us a story even up to later periods. And artists are not allowed to paint stories that are not from their lineage. If they're thinking to paint any story of maybe historical or sacred information, they have to be given permission to be able to proceed. And I think that's important for the artists to stick to the stories and their artistic techniques that was born from their tribes, rather than going to other tribes and asking for their permission. And you see that a lot with modern artists today when they create it. A lot of them as well. You can buy a lot of this modern Aboriginal art online, and what would happen is that the artist would have to ask for permission to create this art and to use this tribe's artistic technique, and then ask for permission for the world to see it as well, because this is very, it speaks to them. It speaks to them, and is their heritage, is very sacred to them, and that's what's important. So the next painting I want to show you is what's the word again? I've forgotten the name of it. I did have it. A macropod. So what everyone thought was a little kangaroo front. It was a little macropod that they had, and what was thought was that they didn't live in this area, but from the paintings left behind, it shows evidence that they were here. Try and get a photo. There he is, there, and you can see how they connected with the little ears, and you can even see his eyes by here. But he's got older paintings as well, all around it. But you can see how this was recently added. But if you look closer, there's fainter lines around the edge, which shows that it was drawn before, but the hatched design of the animal, it was just adding to the story, maybe sort of telling a more different story. And this is an animal that you see very prominently in the cave paintings, but it holds an importance to them. And I think they had a connection with this animal, a very from the looks of it, this one particular animal they had a very strong connection with, and they've seen daily, and that's what they felt like was needed to be documented, because this was at the heart of their ecosystem, their society, their life. But each tribe, from what you can gather from this, has a different dialect, and they all have different iconic symbols. One thing that to notice here is almost faint drawings of boomerangs here, and people on the back. There's all standing together, maybe throwing the boomerangs, maybe at the animal. So it was theorized that maybe that at first that maybe it was hunting, but people have also discussed whether this could sort of be just them showing their human and animal connection, their relationship in their world. But that is not down to me to theorize, and this is what I've read. I think what would be interesting is to have someone who was an Aboriginal that does focus on this, to have their perspective rather than other people theorizing, because I could try and get a sense of it, we all could, but I guess with the different layers, this is someone else's personal story, and we won't really understand that tribe's story. It's almost like just looking at some a quick story of a family's history, and then sort of trying to base your assumptions from that. It's different. But what Carl noted is, has anyone been to St. Fagans quite recently?
No.
Oh, at least a year ago, 2 years ago, probably.
Have you seen that white church? Forgotten what it's called. It's quite far back.
Medieval church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a recreation, a story on the walls when you go inside.
Yes.
And someone had pointed out that there was fish on the walls, and they said, well, this must be to do with the Bible, because there's a lot of relevance with fish and Jesus. But Carl had noted how blue was a very hard colour for paint. At that time it was very expensive, and so fish didn't necessarily mean the Bible. It meant the sea, because fish were in the sea and the sea was blue. So this images of people wearing, say, like a fish dress, they're not trying to be like Lady Gaga with a crazy outfit, it's because it's meant to be a blue dress, and that shows, I think, even when it brought it close to home, how art, even in our own culture, can be interpreted differently to what we think it is now. And I think that definitely is highlighted with this culture as well. It just shows the different interpretations in art. And I think that it's also based on the person's spiritual journey and the way they want to form their art. But the one thing I think that is more advanced when it comes to Australia compared to, say, Wales, is that Australia teaches their Aboriginal art in primary schools. So there's always that basic knowledge of Aboriginal art from a young age, and there's always that awareness and knowledge, and that is what they're saying is keeping this history alive through speaking, but also through adding to this. And this is how he's able to survive longer, is because of how important this is regarded, and how they've managed to carry it on throughout all these years. And now in present day they realise that education of it is important as well. But these paintings not only show personal stories, they can also be ways of teaching, ways of worship, ways of remembering someone. And so they were almost like hospitals. They were almost like schools, big learning places that they could learn from just looking at what their ancestors had written in the past of their experiences. And it's almost like life lessons to learn. And there's a lot to unpack to them, and I could only wish that I would be able to sort of look at that and understand it all completely, like someone who's native to that area, but unfortunately I don't, and so I'll just sit back and I'll admire it. But there was a letter that was, a shape that was important to Aboriginals, is the U shape. Does anyone have an idea why the U shape is important?
In what context?
To their paintings. So the U shape in their paintings was very important to them.
Oh, no, that's a good one. That's a good question.
So I'll tell you why now, so it gets into a little bit of an explanation. So you can see sometimes when you people have documented Aboriginals creating their artwork, and one of the ways of artwork is sand art, where they have loads of different coloured sand, and they will sit there and they will create the art in the sand, and they're sat down, and their butt cheeks are in the sand and their legs are crossed, and they're creating this beautiful art with sand, different coloured sands, and they're very quick with it. And then it's almost as you look away, you go back to look at the art, and it's gone, but they carry on doing another art. And I think that also shows how it's not meant to be a permanent history, is a permanent painting, is meant to be just continuous, is that he just carried on with the next one of expressing himself through art. And when he finally had finished and got up, there was a U shape left in the sand from his bottom, and to them that represents a human. A U shape represents a human, because they sit in the sand, and once they finished creating their sand art, there's just a U shape left from where they've their bottoms. Yeah, so I think that's very interesting to think about when you look at that way, the whole U shape. I think that's it's very interesting to see, and the U shape being so important, whereas it could be something completely different to us. And I think that just shows how different tribes have different understandings of things, because one tribe might not do sand art, and so a U might not be a person to them, but you can see the on the walls is almost like U's here. There's also depictions of people, and it's almost like these are more ghostly figures, because they're not as detailed as maybe another person is by here, and all the animals. But what it's the same as the first photo I showed you. These aren't fish, so to speak. Where is it? It's this animal, they look like manatees, but they're called a dugong.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
So it was thought that these animals never went anywhere near Australia, but the art has shown that they do, and that's just their skeletal bones and their skin. So when you do look back at the art, for example, like this one, you can see where it has all the different you know, the individual bones of the fins, and the one going in the back, and then you have the muscles and you have the skin. So they had a very strong relationship with this animal as well, and it was never thought that they went over there. And I think they're able to preserve the history of this animal being there through their art, and I think it is a lot to tell us as well, I guess, from an archaeological but also a historian's perspective of there is evidence of these animals here through their own documentation, and that you know, it shows animals and humans living in harmony, and this is sort of seen in more of a Malawi area, but these are paintings that are very unique to us and something that we haven't really seen before today, and only a few of them that have been looked into, and they're like currency, really. It has a meaning to the locality, has a different meaning to each locality, and so euros are not useful here, but they're useful in Europe, and it's almost the same with these paintings. They're useful to the tribes, but they're not useful to us because we don't understand them. So another thing that's interesting is that a lot of these tribes were documenting this animal when they were very far inland, and I think that just shows maybe they would have gone on some spiritual journey and interacted with everything around them, and this is where they've come back to create paintings to document everything around them. And I think it has that curiosity with the natural world, but not in a harmful way, in a very respectful way, and it brings, you know, is controversies when Aboriginals still want to use this art themselves to carry on, but I think they should be allowed to carry on adding to them, because otherwise it won't survive. And to respect it, I think that is the way to go, and maybe sort of keep a record of what it looks like over the years. But you know, it shows how this different concept of art is not permanent, and it advances with them, it changes with them. But the reason why the U, going back to the U shape, is so prominent is because a lot of major sites it used sand art, so it was a very common concept when looking at all the different tribes together. But you know, they had all sorts of animals and humans into it. So you have, this is a human, and it goes into great detail to where you see their bones and their veins and their muscles and their joints, and even down to genitalia that they had noted, and it's almost like they've done a 3D photo of a person, but in their own way. And I think when you look at that, it's almost, you know, you can understand why it's considered something in terms of a hospital, because people are looking at their anatomy, and you know, knowing different parts about themselves just through their art, and I think it just shows that they had an experience with that as well. But when you look at their cave art compared to our cave art, they have a vast amount of cave art, and our cave art, we have very few bits of cave art, but it is faded, and this cave art has survived even with continuous adaptations, and it's something that needs the focus on, especially the radiocarbon dating, to know actually how old it is. People get impressed when you get the date wrong and it's older, but for some reason when you get the date wrong and is closer to where we are now, that's not a good thing. But so you can imagine everyone's delight to find out that this cave art was a lot older than what we had thought it was. So, you know, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence around to suggest that this is, you know, this is the oldest form of art. People drew animals, creatures that had estimated to be only seen about 40,000 years ago, and so that's what they originally had thought, but is obviously going a little bit older, and they're now thinking about 80 to 60,000 years ago, but they haven't been able to date the art, and I will go into that very closer on. But which photo is it now? Yeah, so when you look at this photo as well, you see another animal here, maybe an anteater, with his ears, and then you have the I keep forgetting the name, the dugons, and then you have the macropods as well. I don't know whether they're in that one, but I have shown you other evidence of these macropods, and they're with humans as well. So I think it's that respect that they have with nature and how everything lives together harmoniously, and I think it just breaks away that perception of the West that these people weren't very civil and very civilized, really. But the art suggests differently, and even the older forms of it's hard to make out, but it would have been whitewashed, and then the old art would have eventually have come through, especially as time went on. So it's never always meant to be there, but I think the fact that it's shown up, it can still tell us some more. And I think that's what is so significant about it. But a book that discusses this in great detail, if you are interested in it, is the Archaeology of Australian Aboriginal Art by M.J. Morewood, so Visions from the Past. So you can get that. Carl was recommending it a lot this morning, so I think that would be something quite interesting to sort of get right into and focus on, if you want to gain more perspective and insight of it. But I think what you have to be careful with this type of history, because instead of asking tribes, instead of trying to interpret it, maybe ask tribes what they feel like it is meant to be, and their cultural beliefs, because it is their identity, is their cultural belief, really. And it has a multitude of layers that they're past, and each can speak to a different audience as well. So when I mentioned the dot painting and the lines, the first layer could be viewed for children, the very basic part of it, and they understand that. And then as they get older, maybe they understand it through to the second layer, and so on and so forth. So each layer can mean different things, and they're able to read it in different ways, which is hidden from the West. And I would think that was done to preserve the history, and whatnot. And there's 3 levels, they say, to being able to have this visual story brought to you. So maybe a child, an adult, and then a woman, or a child, an adult man, or a child, an adult, and an elderly person. It can vary in that sort of sense, but it's that strong sense of identity and speaking to that person. And we all have different perspectives when looking at history, not history, when it comes to looking at something. So I don't know if any of you have watched The Dig on Netflix, but there's been a lot of interpretations of that. So I was in a bit of a huff because they didn't focus on the archaeology enough for me. I felt like it was too romanticized. And Carl thought that the sex scene at the end was quite weird, and a few other people liked it and saw it as something else. And I think another thing that I had observed from online is how the female assistant on the excavation, I've forgotten her name now, but in the film people have argued that she's seen as very weak and ditzy, whereas I can see this underlying strong woman behind her. And I think maybe she is that interpretation you get from each person, and is how someone else is able to view something and pick something out, whereas another person can't. And I think it's all about what we view, and it's the same with them. What we all view is different. Each perspective is different, and what I see may be different to you, and that can go down a very long road of philosophy, but I'm not going there. But what we all see is different to each other, and what this history and archaeology, especially this painting, for example, is thought that the dark reddish orange outline is meant to be from 300 years ago, whereas the lighter colours in the background is meant to be thousands of years old. But the reason why there's so much confusion over the dating is because a lot of it hasn't been dated, and we will be getting into the science of that after the break. But it's you see how there's been a need, I think, to understand it scientifically, but also it has to be done with respect, without any theoretical discussion about it. But I think this art has seen a lot throughout its history, and is still surviving, and I think that shows how significant it is. But quickly a minute, I don't know why they're all in a bit of a mess, so apologies. Here's a picture of a Digon. Dugon. I keep forgetting it. I have it in my head, and then I second guess what I think is going to be called, and then it comes out as something that it shouldn't. But this is an old painting of one. It's not as detailed as the others, but you can see how it was, the eyes and the nose and the face. You can see it there, and I think it shows their connection, but it's given a location for that animal to be at, rather than thinking it was in another area for that whole time. It shows that it migrated, and maybe can tell us more. But this is an interesting painting as well. It's this skull art. This is, you can see that the skulls that have been put on here are superimposed over lighter examples, and it is, adding again, is maybe this is sort of representing burial rituals and remembering a person going on. And again, it's not for me to say, but looking at that's what I would feel like, but maybe to someone else in the tribe this could mean something else. But it shows how it's continuously added on, and is still practiced today. It's still the same sort of shapes in the later period to the earlier period. And it's, you know, it's just this whole different layers of art. It's almost like dream space, and it's keeping the painting to a very fine detail as well. So you look at the bigger picture, and then when you look closer to it, you end up being able to unpack more of it. And I think, you know, to actually, I think, have an insight of this, I just think the Aboriginals should just be asked about it, and maybe we can understand the history and the connection with other animals from these people, because it seems that this is very powerful and strong for these people. And so I think it needs the justice that it deserves, but with a lot of respect. And I think when it comes to anything like this, you have a lot of ethics come into it. And so I think you know, if you were to investigate it, I think it would have to be to an Aboriginal archaeologist or historian to be able to do it, to understand maybe their understanding of it, as well as be able to talk to other tribes and have their understanding, and with their understanding as well, they could have a better understanding, rather than us going there and asking and being like, well, that seems like a very strange concept to me because I don't do that here. Whereas if another Aboriginal was talking to another one, they could, you know, understand each other. Well, I understand where you get that from, etc. And I think that's why you know, it needs to be focused on with Aboriginals rather than Westerners, because you see how Westerners, even with their attempts to protect this art, it is shown how it can be disastrous in the way that it is perceived and how it's ended up being preserved as well. And I think we've got to be careful of that, because it can be very harmful. So I'm ready for about a 10-minute break if everyone else is, to go back.
Okay.
If anyone's got any questions, so I'll go through it. Anne, have you got any questions?
Well, I was only going to say that, you know, obviously it's all speculation, but, you know, there could be creation myths, you know, that they're kind of thinking about fish as the waters, like you say,
Yeah.
the waters, and you know, you can understand early art having fish in it, you know.
Yeah.
Because they must have had to make sense of the world they live in.
Yeah.
And yeah, I thought that was, yeah, it's a lot of food for thought.
Yes, definitely, Anne.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne. Del?
No, that's fine. Really good. Enjoyed that. Something that I mean, I've known about Aboriginal art and stuff, but I've not heard any sort of talks or anything on it. So, you know, a lot of this is new. Yeah, pretty good, pretty good.
It's nice to explore it, I think.
Yes.
But I can't wait for after the break when we look into the sciencey part of it as well. It's got to love a little bit of that. Bill, have you got anything to say?
Clarification. There's a lot of Aboriginal art on the tourist market these days.
Yes.
Are you saying that that can only be produced by Aboriginals and not by other commercial artists who are non-Aboriginal? Is that the law in the area?
I think, you know, I think it's okay to have in your house, but it's not your art, and you won't understand. And I think the problem with big companies taking it on rather than maybe a small business of Aboriginals working on this art and selling it off with permission is that maybe the meanings can be completely you know, a mishmash of all different tribes, and because of that it's not respected.
Yeah.
I applaud the principle, because obviously it supports the Aborigines, who certainly need support there, and that's only been recognised in recent years. A couple of points on the images you've shown. The dugong figure, in it's actually the flap. It's got 4 finger digits, like 4 fingers.
Yeah.
And the figure of the human male you showed, the anatomy was generally right, but that had 4 fingers as well. Whether that's of any significance, I don't know.
Yeah.
And the last group you showed, to me, looked like a meerkat group. Did you feel that?
Oh, yeah.
With the figures? No, I'm here casting to Australia, but that's what struck me.
Yeah, no,
yeah.
Yeah.
Or monkeys,
Yeah.
I thought.
yeah,
Going back to, you know, the creation myth again.
Yeah. But art is art, and you paint what you think is attractive, unless it's got other significance, other meanings,
Yeah.
you know. But yeah, I've got a question about dating as well. But you said you're going to mention that in the second half. I'll leave that till then. Okay.
Yeah, no,
Thanks,
that's
Jen.
cool. It's all right. Thank you, Bill. Henry, have you got something to say?
No, just really impressed with the artistic designs, and I can understand the overlaying of people coming back and adding and amending, and you know, constant story reflected.
Yeah, it's a lovely way of doing it, I think, and yeah, I think it should be allowed to carry on.
Yeah, it's very fine, you know, very fine drawing, you know.
Yeah, a lot of detail as well, and a lot of patience and love. Pat, if you got any questions or anything to add?
Well, I'm just going to say, when I was there one time, I did buy a boomerang.
Yeah,
I'll bring it and I can show it to you.
Does it work as well? Like, I've never
tried it.
I would love to, but at the same time, I feel like it would just end with you know, tears, especially in my house.
I didn't want to lose it, so
yeah,
a little thing to sit on, and it's painted by Aborigines, you know.
Oh, that's amazing. That's lovely.
Yeah, I might have. Oh yeah, I got another. I'll show you the other. We can put it on speaker thing, and then it'll be larger so you can see, you know.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Oh no, that's lovely. That'd be nice to see, Pat.
2 things, yeah. Okay, I'll go get them.
Thanks, Phil.
So is everyone happy to go for a little break and then come back? Yeah.
Yeah,
See you guys in a bit.
Yeah.
See you after the break.
Yeah.
Cry for me, oh Chihiro. Do not cry for me.
Oh, the actual visit, did you? Oh, you haven't done it. Oh, right.
Minus.
Is everyone ready?
Yeah, I am.
We're waiting on Anne and Pat, so I'll give them a quick minute.
Chirpy chappy. Oh, sorry, Jess. Oh, we've all been off somewhere. I've been talking to my husband.
That's okay, Anne.
About his mother. More forms to fill in. You know, for the council.
They like to bombard you with forms,
Yeah.
don't they?
He said last year they did a assessment and they said, oh, this should be it now. This should be it. I said, don't you believe it?
Yeah.
Price up next year.
Yeah, no, it's like they want blood from a stone sometimes.
Yeah.
I think with them.
And the trouble is, Joe keeps forgetting all his bank details, you know. So I said, write it down.
I know I hate forms. I try and avoid them as best as I can, but sometimes it comes that moment in life where you have to do a big loads of paperwork. I think the last time I had to sort of fiddle around with paperwork, it was mostly to do with student finance, and I just hate that because it's just I messed up my master's one, for example, because I thought, because I hadn't been having I've been living away, haven't had money off my parents, I'm independent, especially because I had a little job when I was in uni. But obviously, because I live at home, I'm a dependent, and I had put it all wrong. And they're asking me for P60s, and I panicked because I didn't have like these P60s from like 3 years ago. And it was easily sorted, but it's too much paperwork, and sometimes they overcomplicate it.
Yeah, they do. They do. Oh.
Is everyone ready to start?
Yeah.
Cool.
Henry is. Henry? Henry? Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. I was going to say, of course, the temperature makes a big difference with being able to preserve it, I suppose. That's what you're going to tell us. Outside, isn't it? It's more or less outside. It's a lot of it.
I think it's very fantastic as well how it's managed to be so high up and very. So I think it's very beautiful because from a glance, it just looks like part of the rock. And then you look closely and start to see more images being available to you. But I think this just shows the artistic, the artist's way of showing their identity, who they are, what's their life experiences, and our life experiences are all important to us as we get older. And I think identity grows as well as you get older, and I think that's why this should be allowed to be added to throughout the history of these tribes, because we were doing a discussion on identity in the medieval period in my seminar last week, and the first exercise was to write down things that say something about our identity, and it was a lot harder than what you thought, but I put the basic things. I'm Welsh, I like history, I like archaeology, I'm a Scorpio. It was just all those basic things, but compared to the mature students in the class, me and the few others, our identity list seemed to be very small compared to the mature students, and I think it just shows how identity builds as you get older. And I think that is what these paintings also show, is how their identity grows as they as time goes on, and that's why it's not permanent, because I think our identity is never really permanent. Things can change, especially with today, for example, when you think of politics, a lot of people's political identity changes, and it's almost like adding to it, where they don't identify with something anymore, or this fits them better, and I think that all comes with experiences as well,
and we have identity crises, don't we, in the
West? Yes.
I don't think. Maybe they're working their crisis out.
No, I think I don't think it was so much of an identity crisis in myself, but I remember when I was in college, things were, I was no longer in high school. This whole world of maybe being spoon-fed everything and someone telling me what to do all the time, it changed drastically, and I think I was questioning maybe who I am as a person, because I was trying to find who I am, and obviously it's developed as I've got to the age that I am now, but I think we're always still trying to find out who we are really with our identity, and it doesn't matter whether it's political, religious, social, cultural,
We have to keep
even down to our ancestry.
updating it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, their life experiences, maybe their spiritual experiences or things that they've seen around them, that helped bring identity to themselves and tell their story. So I think that, you know, it's almost identity mixed in with the history, and it just says who they are. But what I'll you know, you see the whole concept of them living very well with the animals and documenting them, but I think their experiences on the animals around them differ from each tribe, and that's why each animal means something completely different to each one of those tribes. But you know, there's all sorts of animals like bilbies and loads of different creatures, but snakes have been one of them. Just snakes, fish, people. This is, you know, is showing their world, and they even have some images. See if I have it in any of the ones that I have, where you can sort of see making out of so that's almost like fish there, snake, maybe a person or something with a beak there, but it's all added on. But there is like flora and fauna here. So it shows that it's not just animals, but it's also the environment around them that's being added, and it's a mixture of their environment, their culture, identity, and what they mix with. I think that, you know, especially with Bill, I don't know whether this was, no, that's 5. Sorry.
5. Sorry.
Yeah, no. Sorry.
It 5, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So it took me a minute there to count them.
Well,
I'm naturally blonde, so you'll have to forgive me. But yeah, I think it's very interesting that you noted that as well, Bill. But you see, I think it also shows as well the evolution of the animals, where that, you know, they were here and then they've moved on to somewhere else, and finding out that they were already here through the art. You know, they're giving us information that you know, we probably wouldn't be able to access without them. But there was a bushfire in 2018 that had shown damage to a cave painting in, where's that, Balloon Lake. So it was BL and then O cave, ON cave, sorry. But there was a fire damage, and the reason why there was a fire damage was the way of preserving these cave paintings. Westerners, you know, people who are not indigenous, wanted to preserve it and show it off so they could have a look, which there's nothing wrong with that. But what had happened was that the walkway up to it and where it was all preserved, it was used with recycled plastic, and the bushfire, when combined with that, it just created a big ball of fire, and it damaged the rock art to a point where they cannot restore it. But this was the rock art that was there that is no longer there, and
those are quite famous, aren't they? Those,
yeah.
Well, yeah, I think so.
And yeah, and I think, you know, I think it also shows, you know, when I was talking about the you being the person sat down, it's you know, is using colour to just go around something, can leave the shape behind. And I think hands and U shapes are just signs of people, signs of the individual. And as you can see, some are more darker and some are more lighter. So I think this is you know, a tribe's history, and sort of maybe like their sort of form of a family tree where they're connecting with their ancestors. But unfortunately, this is all that we can see of it now because of what had happened. And I think this is just, this is a part of people's identity that is gone, and this is something that's gone forever, and this is because non-Indigenous people wanted these plastic walkways covering the wall art as well, the rock art as well, and it was prevented from ever being added to as well. So something that was their hospital, their school, is gone forever, and something that they can't add to. And I think it's not just their identity is gone, it's almost like their connection. It's like what I say every time when I think of a historical building, for example. I always say that I put my hands on the walls and I close my eyes, and I like to imagine different time periods, and maybe an argument between two lovers, or a child playing down there with their friends. That's what I like to think of. And maybe that was a way of doing that for them through art, but unfortunately they were prevented from adding to it, and now it's gone forever. And this was in the Carn Arvon National Park. So this dated back several thousands of years, and it was very old. It was one of the oldest ones, and this is seen as a loss in culture. And Mr. Harding, he was a professor at a university nearby. He said that he's also an Aboriginal. He said that the art was the foundation and identity of who he was, and he expressed his upset about it. And he was the one that described this as something like a university, a hospital, and a cathedral. And he compared this to the destruction of Notre Dame Cathedral for the people of Paris. They feel like they can't take back what has gone missing there, and it feels the same for them. So it shows how this art is highly regarded with these people, but is lamented because of his loss. And I just don't understand how it wasn't thought through properly. How something like that could have easily happened, to have this installation of recycled plastic walkways. If I think any logical person, if there's bushfires that are common in the area, then I think it's common sense to people that would be a bad idea.
It sounds like they didn't value it as much, because these are very, very early, these handprints, and they done with blowing, pigment through something, to create the shape of the hand. They use like a straw, not a straw, but something like that. And it's children's hands usually. So I don't know, it just makes you feel that, that they didn't really value them as much. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I think I get that as well from it. And I think, it wasn't respected in terms of, it wasn't allowed to be added on either. And it's a shame, but it was beyond restoration. And the reason why this has been so significant now is because due to this, you're not allowed to have any recycled plastic as a way of protecting any of these sites now.
Oh, well, that's good.
It's made a stand, I think, for other pieces of rock art that maybe, because I think there's nothing wrong with people going to view it, but I think the way it's been treated is what's wrong with it. And it's considered one of the oldest pieces of art that we have. So I don't understand why it hasn't had much attention. And you see how,
though, isn't it? It's political, really.
Yeah, and I think you know, even though we will never understand it ourselves the way someone would understand from an Aboriginal community, it's almost like I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this, but it's called the Indalo man from Spain. Is a stick figure, really, and his arms are out like this, but they're joined in like a semicircle over his head. And that's it from a cave in southern Spain. I can't pinpoint exactly where from the top of my head, but it was something.
Altamira.
I'm not too sure. I will find out though for us. I'll find out by the time that we have our next lesson. But it shows how when I looked at it, I knew that it had a significance, especially being in a cave and being it was part of their history and culture. But to them, it meant the people in Spain in this little community that I went to. To them, it meant so much more, and it meant a lot more to them, and it was something that I never really understood 100%, and I don't think I ever will, but I admired it. And it's the same with Australian Aboriginal art. We'll never understand it. People from the area will understand it, and they'll have a strong connection with it, whereas as an outsider, you can tell it's the history and you can admire it for that and how beautiful it is, but the meaning gets lost when it comes to people. And I just think that's just because of different forms of identity, different geographical locations, different experiences in life, and just different ways of viewing things. And I think that's why it needs to be treated with care when studied by any archaeologist or historian of the period. But these are beautiful caves, and you see loads of different things going on with them. And like I said, when you look at them stepping back, looks very very detailed and a lot going on, and sometimes it can look like just part of the rock, but looking closely you start to see how they have an understanding for muscles and things. And I think that's very advanced as well, this whole X-ray art, because when you compare it for even our art, where during medieval periods, sometimes our proportions can be a little bit wrong. There's some images you see, and a person looks much bigger than the other one, or baby Jesus looks like a tiny man, and it doesn't look right. But they had a different way of doing it, where they were able to have accuracy with anatomy, and I think that's interesting. I think different cultures and their different ways of art, but how they were doing it in a very advanced way, and you have it on anatomy drawings in the medieval period, but I feel like they never have the detail that they have with this, especially when it comes to muscles and veins. Sometimes with medieval drawings you just have the veins and some of the guts and or just the skeleton, but this has got, to me, it's got everything, and it shows that they had a very strong understanding for animal life as well as human life as well. And it just, I think it just shows their intelligence as well as a people. And I just think the way that they were able to interpret every part of the body in art in a very beautiful way, I think that's something to note. So I'm gonna go on now. I got no visual aid for this. I'm just going on from what I've looked into, and along with the a nice beautiful image that you can observe. But a lot of people, when they come to think of this, they will be forgiven for thinking that this is the Australia has some of the oldest rock art in the world, because the truth is, to this, at the moment, there's no reliable dating to show this. They haven't found something that dates it directly. So archaeologist Dr. Bruno David of Monash University, he was able to, reliably date the oldest rock carvings in Australia to about 13,000 to 15,000 years old. And that was from rock art in Laura in Queensland. And Dr. Bruno David, this is a quote by him, he had said, "These were dated using carbon dating of charcoal buried at the same depth of engravings," he said. "Beyond engravings, the oldest reliably dated rock art in Australia is 28,000 years old. Is a fragment of a charcoal cave painting found buried in Arnhem Land cave by David and his colleagues." So what they're saying here was originally it was thought to be 14,000 years old, and then it got pushed further then to 28,000 years old. Just looking at the engravings of the wall and the charcoal that had been used to paint it, how they were able to look at the microorganisms in it and tell us the date through that way. But dating cave art at the moment has seemed to be quite a tricky one in terms of they haven't really found something that's very reliable yet. Each form of dating can give out a different answer, and I think that's showing us how delicate the landscape is. That different methods of dating can give just different dates and different answers. But they're saying now that they think that the date is no longer a guess, and 28,000 years old was given by Dr. Bruno David for Northern Australian painting from charcoal. And it's just highlighting, I think, is illuminating to us how the development of technology, especially from the 1980s onwards in archaeology, where you have this new age of archaeology, it shows how it progresses, and we're able to let archaeology as well be the horse that pulls the cart in these cases, instead of allowing just the paintings and oral history tell us what they know. We're able to find out things from confirm things, but also I think gain an insight of the where it all starts. But the development of tech definitely makes the dating of this very much easier for archaeologists. And so fragments of both preserved and datable rock is being buried in carbon containing soil. So dating most rock isn't very straightforward, and I think that's where the issue is. And I think that can be very off-putting, I guess, to some archaeologists, that with this being such a complicated thing due to it being a delicate landscape, it can be very daunting. But I think it needs the funding and love and the people who are passionate about it, so i.e. the Indigenous people, to be able to bring to life what we know about it. But this is known as the oldest rock art in the world. When it comes to oldest rock paintings, when it comes to Indonesia and Spain, and when you date it, it shows a more complex method, because it looks at the age of a microscopic layer of minerals, which was deposited after the art was created. So we're just it's not looking at the rock itself, or the paint, is the micro organisms that are inside, and what that can tell us about so it creates a crust. When you put the paint down and it dries, it creates a crust, and there's the calcium oxide from the mineral crust that is used in this carbon dating to be able to reveal to us the dates of the art. And I've never been extremely good at science, but you know, it would be something that I'd be very interested in wanting to do if I could ever give the chance. You know, discovering the date of something. And I think looking at the date of something when it comes to these fellows, I've forgotten their name again. Yeah. When it comes to these, I think if you're able to, yes, dugong. When it comes to these guys, I think if we were able to find the radiocarbon dating of these, I think that would be able to allow us to sort of pinpoint where they were at a time rather than where we originally had thought they were. And I think it just then probably shows how they've evolved in different climates. So dating in that sense not only tells us more about the painting and how old they are, but I think it tells us more about the landscape and the ecosystem as well as the animals that used to live there. But you know, it relies on the measuring the the decay of uranium in this microscopic crust to give a minimum age of the art. So it gives them a minimum age, and then it could be higher, but it's at least this point. And I think that's why we come up with 13,000 and 14,000 is because the method showed them an earlier dating. And I think that just shows the big issue that we have today is that you know, different methods react to different chemicals at different minerals, and this can give out different datable pieces of rock. And I think one thing to why Australia hasn't been confirmed with their times, etc., their dates, is because what had happened, not enough samples were taken from the cave itself. Only one sample was taken, and it's best to take a couple of samples, because if that one method does not work, then you can use all different methods, and then looking at the evidence that you have in front of you, you can then all piece them together, you know, to gain an understanding based on just, you know, evidence that you've collected. And you know, both you know, these appeared to be in caves that they would have probably been good for preservation. However, the reason why the preservation of Australian art compared to Spain and Indonesia, for example, is that Spain and Indonesia have limestone caves, whereas, you know, this is very rare in Australia, and so this is perfect conditions for cave art to just survive, and for you know, to just tell us furthermore. But you know, you can see human figures here, and I'm sure what we can see what they are doing there.
It looks like perfect copulation for COVID.
Yeah. So, you know, it's all different figures and animals and different experiences. When you look at it, I think you start seeing more and more, I guess, to yourself, but that's just me going on a tangent, sort of focusing on things and being like, hang on a minute. But yeah, so, you know, it's all down to right, there's a orca painting of a giant emu-like bird that's found in northern Australia. I'll type the location into the chat. There. So it was in was it the Arnhem, who wants to behave, the Arnhem here, and that is really believe, you know, it has. This is where we got their evidence from, that area, and what you know, this area has shown an emu-like bird from this area, and is believed to be about 40,000 years old. I couldn't find a photo of this, but is it, you know, this is older than the Spanish and Indonesian paintings used in their caves, but there's no, you know, there's no datable carbon when it comes to plant or charcoal or dust that was in this ochre pigment, according to Dr. Bruno Davis. So that was what caused an issue, is that sometimes different materials for painting can come up differently on different methods, and sometimes can be inconclusive. But from what they thought of looking into the data and testing, they do believe that it is 40,000 years old. But you know, I think it shows the need for new methods to develop, and I think that's something that hopefully we see in the future. And this allows us to tell more, because it tells us more than just about the Aboriginals. It tells us about natural history as well, and like I said, ecosystems and animals moving and plants that used to be there. I think just dating it, we can sort of pinpoint, right, well, this cave painting was done, and you know, this animal, for example, is no longer here, or we didn't think that they were there. A macropod, for example, that's not really seen around there that often anymore, and they can pinpoint exactly where they think that it was still hanging about that area, and maybe try and then find some more evidence to why they had gone. But you know, these people were able to tell a story through their connections and relationships with the world around them and with other people. And you know, I think the evidence that when we get presented with it, it shows that we have, you know, Australia has the world's oldest art, and even the hand stencils that we see in North Queensland, that's believed to be about 30,000 years old. And Dr. Bruno Davis, he hopes to be involved in the dating of any of these in the future. So I think he's an archaeologist to look at in terms of this. So Dr. Bruno Davis, David, not Davis, he's the archaeologist there, and he's very much stuck into it because it is his identity. And I think having someone like him on board is able to interpret it and maybe sort of push our history, his history, you know, out there, but in a way that it can be respected and admired by other cultures as well. Because I think there's nothing wrong with having that. For example, you know, I have art on my wall, even though my mother had painted it, is the traditional sort of sugar skull paintings, and you know, the way she's done it, it has a meaning to her and me, but you know, to other people it might just look like a really crazy Tim Burton-y painting. I'll see if I can hang up there. But it's using sort of Mexican influences. I think I stopped sharing a minute. Is this sort of painting here? You know, it's different cultures have different ways of painting it, but there was something that my mum looked a lot into, and she respected it, and you know, she took her own artistic expression into that form. So you know, it all has different meanings to each other, and I think you know, there's nothing wrong with sharing that culture around with other people, but I think it, you know, that understanding and that respect needs to be done there as well. And I think the education of it as well. I think if you are going to be someone maybe that wants to do Aboriginal inspired painting, so not Aboriginal painting, because an Aboriginal painting on the modern market, it's got to be done by an Aboriginal. But I think if someone wants to take that inspiration, they can. But I think a lot of education and research needs to go into it to understand this. And I think it can be a very touchy subject, because it's you know, something that we can't grasp as much as maybe someone who feels like is their identity would understand. And Dr. David Bruno takes this really seriously. He feels a great connection with this. But you know, I think he's put a lot of work into it quite recently, to actually try and date these and sort of draw on any animals that could have been there about 40,000 years ago. And you know, you don't know the date of the art itself, but they have the tools that's there to make a you know, an almost accurate assumption of the Australian Aboriginal way of thinking and their art. And maybe I think in terms of looking at it is maybe looking at like I said, the natural history that we can grab out of it, maybe the everyday mundane parts of history that we can grab out of it, you know, flowers, animals, etc. You know, how maybe build a landscape of what we know around us and use it as a text that can tell us something. But obviously from what we, you know, I think that would take an Aboriginal to do, because they would be the best ones to understand it. But the ANSTO's Centre for Accelerator Science has made it possible to produce some of the first reliable carbon dates for this rock art. So in a study that was published online in the Journal of Archaeological Science report, you know, they've quite a good journal to look at sometimes, if you can get access to it. And you know, there's some websites that you can use that gives you access. They can give you a much, you know, meaty description where they have all the evidence, and sometimes it can look very much like, woo, that's a lot to look at. But you know, when you look at it and then you see their discussions underneath the evidence that they find, you know, it gives you a better perspective. So that journal is a very good one to look out for, the Journal of Archaeological Science reports, because you know, it is the raw data as well. You can get without, you know, you can't argue with science, I guess. That's what I always say.
There's some free classes online from all the universities all over the world, really. And I know there's one from Monash. I can't remember the name of the site now. I'll bring it next time.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And that can be your homework if you want. But yeah, no, that the first site that you mentioned, that is, you know, a site that they've got a lot of data from, but that the university there as well is also focused on it. And it seems like not only is it sort of focused on in their earlier education, you see the higher up education really wanting to sort of hone down on this now. And I think it's that need as well of understanding identity, and I think letting others know of your identity and your culture, because it is something to be proud of. Everyone's proud of their identity and culture, and I think that is their way of doing it, is sort of finding out the radiocarbon dates. And I think at the moment it just, you know, the technology is developing quite slowly, and I think it's finding the right one that tells us the best thing. And it's trial and error, really. I think that's the same with any science, isn't it? You observe it and you think, oh, well, this method's a bit rubbish with this pigment or this rock, and we'll try it on this one. And I think that was what the issue was previously, is that they didn't take enough samples to do this. They just took 1 or 2 samples and sort of done one method on it, or 2 methods, and just left it at that and said, oh, 13,000 years ago, but it's proven to be much older than that. And I think that's what makes it even more exciting when it gets older. And they've even said that even though they think it's about 40,000 years, they think it might be a lot more older, because they're still developing. And that's the issue, is that the uncertainty, but they know is around about at least 40,000 years old. And I think the reason why it gets more exciting as it gets older is because it shows how entrenched this tradition, this culture, and this idea of expressing identity is still in these, you know, these groups of people in this community, and how it's able to be pushed on further. And I think, you know, just like it can be, it's almost like I said, with different audiences that you have with it, it's almost like life lessons as well for each person at each stage of their life. And you know, it's their way of storytelling, but I think it's also to inform their community of their experiences as well. So, you know,
yeah, the lovely thing about Australia is that you know, I don't know about the way the world has moved, but I know it has. But you know, the countries have moved on the world, sort of thing. But
yeah,
of course, the European art was absolutely affected by the Ice Age, you know, and the you know, the Ice Age. So our rock paintings are usually been, well, this is 10 years ago now when I was researching it, is like up to about 20,000 years. And Australian art was always seen as about 30 or 40,000 years. So now, 10 years on, it's, you know, it's even older because it's preserved, you know, it is actually, Australian art is preserved, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and it's a very beautiful level, I think, of the way it has been preserved. It's so well preserved, and there's lots of it, and I think it's a shame when you look at how only a small amount has been looked at, and I think this is why they're sort of pushing towards it now, especially with this.
Especially since the French has kind of almost disappeared off the walls. The French art and cave art, you know, is virtually being destroyed by, you know, our microorganisms, you know, of people going in to see it.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to be learned from that as well.
Yeah, and I think it, you know, it highlights the geographical influence on the preservation. So sometimes, you know, preserving something is not necessarily down to the people or the government, etc. It can be down to just the weather, but they seem to have great, you know, weather for this. But there was a paper that, you know, this whole debate behind the dating of these cave paintings is very it's very hotly debated, is a big topic, especially in science and archaeology, and they're talking about how the microorganisms photosynthetic bacteria, so like cyanobacteria or algae, which can be used to utilize carbon from the air normally. They're active through wet periods. They don't think it was that because they didn't, you know, there was no evidence of something being that wet to create these microorganisms, and so they feel like is you know, this shows that there's another type of chromometric data for the rock art, and how there's different forms of bacteria and microorganisms entrenched into the art that can, you know, we're learning something new about it, I think, every day. And I think until they figure out what it is keeping it preserved and exactly, and what the date is exactly, and the best method, I think that's when we can move forward. And I think even though we've had this new age of technology and archaeology from the 80s onwards, it's still I think early days in putting it into practice, and it's something that we're all working on towards, to, you know, to gain an understanding of not just our identity, but the identity of the world and how that fits in with each other. And I think, like I said, it just tells us more then of natural history, and it can even go into social. So that I think that's what I have to say on all that. And I think it, you know, it was something that I really enjoyed looking into, especially when you look at the modern interpretations of it. You can see how it differs. And I think when you look at modern imagery of it, it does look, you know, when you look at all the cave art and then you compare it to modern, you notice that the cave art is different to somehow the modern, because maybe the modern has got some more different meanings as time have gone on, or maybe it could have just been, you know, made by someone that wasn't Aboriginal and this is their interpretation of it. But I think for it to be Aboriginal is from someone who was Aboriginal, and I think this could even push forward to funding the Aboriginal community in terms of they're creating these paintings and they are selling them to tourists. And I think that this should be a way that they can sort of benefit from that, as well as spreading their identity and sort of informing others, because they're not gatekeeping this painting. I think they want to share it with other people, but what they're asking for is people to respect it. And I think that's, you know, I think that's what needs to be done. And until people you know, and try to understand, you know, how it can be different to our thinking, and how it can be different with each tribe, and maybe sort of try and learn more about it like we have today. I think until then is an issue with anyone just sort of painting it for how they feel like it is, because they'll never have the interpretation that Aboriginals did. But I hope you guys enjoyed this one, because I did. And you know, looking at the outbreak through the dating, even though we haven't got a definite date, is still an outbreak that is developing. It was telling us more. And I think the destruction to some sites due to fire highlights how they need to be protected, but ultimately you can have an insight to this of how this is important to their identity, to their communities, and how each one has a different personal meaning to their tribe. And so when you look at that, you don't just see the beauty of it, you also see that there's got a personal connection. And just by you looking at it, I think it gives you a connection with the Aboriginal that had done it, because you're looking at something that they've interpreted it, and you know, it's their mark, is something they're telling you about themselves. So I've got to ask now if anyone's got anything to say, and I'll start with Anne, because I know Anne seems very interested.
I keep interrupting. I just wondered whether, because that's the way Carl trained us, you see, he turned us all off and we're not supposed to interrupt. But we did wonder whether with you might allow us in a bit more.
I'm relaxed with that. I do like a bit of engagement.
I just wondered how, you haven't taught Langford yet, have you?
No.
We don't know what they're like. But anyway, I was really interesting, and I did do a bit of research into cave art, you know, and I feel there's so much more, you know, to sort of appreciate really. That's it, isn't it, you know? And how I always thought it might have had something, well, it's communication really. I mean, that's the most important thing, is that it is communicating, you know, and it might be our earliest sort of writing, you know, language, I don't know.
Yeah, I think that was something that I forgot to mention as well, is that I sort of made the connection with manuscripts, how, you know, like I said, the seals on medieval manuscripts can mean something about that person. And I read an article into it where it was how the way they made the handwriting that they had chosen, or the way that it was centered, you know, it's all based on how that person uses I think either art or, you know, literary sort of works to actually show their identity, and how that's, you know, I think that's a big part of influence with humanity, is things like that. And I think one way that I express myself, maybe that's different to everyone else's, is so I'm not very artsy, and my ways are different. So is sort of writing things down, or my tattoos. I've only got two, but one means a lot to me, and it was I had a brown rabbit, and he reminded me of the brown rabbit from Watership Down, and the beginning part, I had the brown rabbit tattoo to me, but people just look at it and they think it's a funky, cool rabbit. Or I've heard some right random things said.
Yeah. That's what came to my mind actually, was I don't know if anyone else felt that. It was a bit like tattoos, you know, that's part of their culture, you know, of maybe more Maoris, you know. But it's a similar sort of thing that is very, very personal, and it's your little story, you know. And yes, it's no, very good. Thank you anyway. Thank you for
it's all right, Tom. Thank you for your contribution for all of it. Thank you. Phil, do you have anything to add or ask?
No, really enjoyed that. Thanks, but I've got to go now, so
it's okay.
Thank you. See you next week.
Take care.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bill, anything you'd like to ask or add?
Yes, indeed. When it comes to dating, you mentioned radiocarbon dating, obviously based on the fact that the pigment contains carbon-14, and radiocarbon dating techniques have certainly improved and more accurate over the years, you know. But it occurs to me, and I might be talking absolute rubbish, you know, there's another technique called surface luminescent. So if you actually took a reading, if possible, of the pigment itself on the rock and go to another part of the cave where there's unpainted virgin rock and took a reading there, if this possible, and compare them, would that be able to give you some idea of a reading? Now that's for Karl, I think. I'd like to Karl ask. Like to ask Karl that question, you know. But there are other techniques, and as you mentioned, there are new techniques coming through all the time to improve the accuracy of all this, you know. That's point one on dating. The other point, which Anne mentioned actually, is a very valid point about do these images mean anything? So think outside the box now. If you go back to Egyptology and hieroglyphics, when they were first discovered by the modern world, they were assumed to be just pictographs, just images. And quite a few years actually recognized that they weren't that at all. They were a language. So taking that idea forward to rock art, all these little images of animals or fish with all sort of symbols around them and marks, etc., inside and outside them. Possibly that is their language as well. They actually meant something. It wasn't just art for art's sake. They actually meant something and communicated some message along the line.
Yeah.
Now,
I like that.
Maybe someone at this moment is taking that forward and trying to sort of look at all these images from all over Australia and all different areas, and she tried to interpret exactly what they could be, and could they be a language? And are there similar sort of symbols on each of these images, could be thousands of miles apart, which actually could lead you to come to a conclusion, yes, they actually do mean something, and they mean this or that, you know. Something to think about, you know, but it's a fascinating story. It really is, isn't it? Yeah, so that's me. Thank you, Jess.
It's all right. Thank you, Bella. I liked what you had to say there. Obviously, I think Karl would be able to give insight to the sciencey question that you are.
Dr. Karl, actually, I might be talking rubbish about this luminescence technique.
Luminescence.
Yeah.
Is he listening?
I'm listening. I'm waiting for you.
I'll do Pat. Pat, is there anything that you'd like to say?
I'm going to show you my boomerang.
Oh, go on.
If you go up in the corner of your screen and change the view to speaker view, when I talk, it'll be big, you know, big. So as long as I'm talking, the rest of you can do that too. Change it to speaker view, and I should come up. Let's see, where is it? There it is. There.
Oh, yes.
Yes, there's the turtle, and there's the fish.
Yeah.
And, it is a boomerang. I have a little thing that it was, supposed to be sat on, and it says Australian boomerang, hand painted and crafted from native timbers.
Wow!
And I remembered I also had this picture here that I got, and it's actually on bark. It's
wow!
It's a swamp tree, a special named tree, and you know it's from Australia because you see the kangaroos.
Yeah. Iconic animal.
But I made a mistake and I didn't put glass on it. And when I used to have a cleaning lady, I think she took a whoosh across there, and you can see it's a little lighter there. I think she took some of the bark off.
Oh, right.
But it's a pretty picture. I had to get all the dust off it before I could show it to you.
Oh, no, they're lovely. Thank you, Pat. Henry, have you got anything to say?
No, that was I enjoyed that very much. Just one quick question: Are they still discovering cave art today?
I think that they still are. It's a big landscape, and they're only focusing on certain areas. So I think there's a lot more cave art to be discovered.
Yes, yeah. It's a big country, I'm sure, as well. Understood that out there. There's got to be, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, one other question. Bill's making me very cold. He looks as though he's wrapped up for the Arctic.
You're not all morning, Henry.
You have to get a red colour in your background. Get a red wall. A warmer wall.
Does his central heating work yet?
Yeah, it is. It is working, yeah.
It was in the freezer, that's why.
Oh, bless. No, that was great. Thank you, everyone. I'll hand you over to Carl to answer the last question answer the question that Bill had asked, that I feel like I would not be well enough to answer. So off to you, Carl.
Thanks so much.
Bill, yeah, I only caught part of that. So can you ask the question about thermoluminescence again?
Yeah, because Jess talked about using radiocarbon dating to try to get some idea of the dates and the age of these cave paintings, Carl. So I suggested, and this could be absolute rubbish, is thermoluminescence technique applicable for rock art, to give you some idea? What I said was, if you could possibly take a reading on the pigment itself, and then go to another part of the cave where you've got unpainted virgin rock, and took another reading then and compared them. Is that practical, possible, or is it all nonsense what I'm talking about?
No, I wasn't exactly sure whether I've just what I'm going to do. There is right, yes. There was a link that I sent. I sent to Jessica. I'm just trying to get it up so I can answer this question. I've just got to make sure that it's such new science that I can't even remember the name of the technique. So I'm just going to get this up here, and here we go. And it was under Aboriginal art. Right, okay. Bingo. Right, okay. So no, it wasn't that one. Hang on. Right, hang on a minute. I just there is here somewhere. It was.
Give us an answer next week, if you want to.
No, I've actually got it in front of me. But basically, I've got a friend in Australia, and she had a brand new machine just before Christmas called a accelerator mass spectrometry. It's a big weird thing, right? So Marion was she puts photographs of stuff on Instagram all the time. She's doing a PhD and so on. And one of the things, this basically takes very, very fine particles, and the new technique is basically known as calcium oxalate. They extract calcium oxalate. So obviously calcium is associated with living creatures. Calcium oxalate from a mineral crust growing on the surface, and this calcium oxalate is the end result of microorganisms, and these microorganisms. But basically, if we start from Bill's last thing and aim forward, so obviously we have the cave roof, right? So we've got a cave roof, so it's going to be the normal calcium carbonates to create a coating on the cave roof are going to be more absent because it is actually a horizontal bed rather than a vertical bed. So you're not going to get the calcium carbonate coverings that are going to seal to give you an idea of dating from the surfaces. So what they're finding is that these microorganisms, once they're dead, those microorganisms act as recorders for radiocarbon, but they've got to use this new dating technique, which they analyze from the microorganisms using the spectrometry equipment. Basically, so what you've got the original surface, there's nothing on it, and then you've got a cave painting, right? Just one single cave painting, and then that cave painting predates this crust that builds up, this crust of microorganisms that build up on it, right? So what you do, you get a date from those microorganisms using a spectrometry equipment. So that would give you like 8,000 years ago. So that 8,000 years ago is newer than the surface it covers. So the surface might be from 9,000 years ago. But this is where it gets even more interesting, as all demonstrations with the cave art in regards to Australia. I don't think you've come across one example where there's one example of art. There's always more than one example on top of each other, So the new way of dating is to obviously date the first layer, which is the one in front of us, and then you've got the art below that, and then below that art you're going to have another layer of these microorganisms. So you date them, and then that would post date the earlier stuff. So basically we're talking about terminus postquem, which is the earliest possible date. So terminus antequem is the date on the surface. So as you go back, you can read these like a book, and the technology is now there. And this is the exciting boundary that archaeologists used to say that these things were like 10,000 years ago, 40,000 years ago. But what they are now realizing is that the archaeologists were wrong because they were older than they said. And that was I heard that point that Jessica made earlier on. When archaeologists say, "Oh, this is 5,000 years ago," when it's only 100 years old, it makes us look like complete idiots. But when we say 5,000 years old, when in fact it's 6,000 years old, it's so good to be wrong because it's actually older than you said. So actually, most things in archaeology of a prehistoric date are older than archaeologists say.
Okay, so this technique can be used.
Yes, it is being used, and this is how they're dating it now. They're able to read these layers like pages in a book. So in other words, that's the first layer in the book, and they're able to then look at the art below, and then there's a layer of these microorganisms below that, so they date that, and then that's going to be earlier than this. So if you date these, so you've got 100 years ago, the art is 200 years old. So 1,000 years ago, the microorganism, and then the art is 2,000, and you keep going back. You might get back to 10,000, 40,000, 50, 60,000. And now the archaeologists can use this technology to date what they've been saying. But they're usually wrong, because they're usually out, because they've given a newer date than an old date, which is brilliant.
Thank you, Carl. You've answered my question very comprehensively.
It's a bit like me being with Michelle, right? I keep saying to myself she's 30 when in fact she's 50. So I'm glad I'm lying to myself in a positive way. So anyway, so
thank you.
Okay, well, thank
next
you.
week we're going to be the Scythians.
We enjoyed our talk anyway, and it's given us some more things to think about.
So it's
and we're going now.
okay then.
Time to go.
Up to you to close the meeting.
Take care, everyone. Have a lovely evening, and I will see you.
Thank you.
I'll see some of you at 7 o'clock tonight.
Bye bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
So we'll say that, right, Jessica. This was live. This is still live on YouTube.
Right. Okay.
So,
yeah, I can see it in the corner.
Yeah, it is, and yes, I've been multitasking whilst you've been doing. So there's yes, so right, so that worked out okay. So it's still being recorded. So anything you want to say to anyone watching before we go?
No, thank you for joining me, and see you again soon.
So what we'll do, we'll stop the recording on 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much for watching, and another YouTube broadcast from karl-james Langford. And this is Jessica. Jessica Moultrie from Cardiff. Very French name, or whatever name it is. And we'll go from there. Thank you very much. Stop. We've stopped. Oh, and weirdly enough, it keeps being live. So